The heel snapped at 7:52 in the morning. Not a wobble, not a warning, a clean, vicious snap. Right there on Michigan Avenue in the pouring rain, on the single most important morning of Zuri Addo's life. She looked down at her foot. She looked up at the sky. She took one slow breath and made a decision, the way she always made decisions, quickly, without drama, and with absolute commitment to the result. First day, new job, senior head of brand communications at Park and Shin Development Group, the role she had chased for 8 months, the role that 3 other candidates had wanted, the role that was hers now. She hitched her bag up over the generous curve of her shoulder, all 5 feet 7 inches of her, full-figured, broad-shouldered, so with a body that moved through the world like it had never once been invited to apologize for itself, and started walking, lopsided, soaking, completely undignified. She made it exactly half a block. The black Mercedes came from the left lane doing nothing technically illegal. It simply did not slow for the enormous lake of rainwater pooled against the curb. The tire hit it at speed, and the water went up in a perfect, devastating arc and hit Zuri from her right shoulder all the way to her left knee. She stood completely still for 4 full seconds. Her latte survived. She would never understand why, but her cream blazer, her silk blouse, the pencil skirt she had steamed at 6 that morning across the full, proud stretch of her hips, all of it, soaked through to the skin. The Mercedes stopped. Good, Zuri thought, because she had things to say. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, Korean, mid-30s, with the kind of bone structure that belonged somewhere considerably more expensive than a Chicago gutter puddle. He wore a black suit that wore him back with equal authority, and at his collar, just visible above the crisp white of his shirt, was the edge of a tattoo. Dark ink, deliberate. The kind that didn't belong to a hobby or a phase. It belonged to a history. He came around the car with an umbrella and tilted it toward her like that gesture was going to accomplish one single thing now that the event had already occurred. "I'm so sorry," he said. Low voice. Controlled. Every word chosen before it left his mouth. Are you serious?" He blinked. "You're standing in front of me with an umbrella right now. After. The water is already on my body." She held out her soaked arm, and she did not flinch from the way his eyes moved across her, taking in the full and magnificent scale of her, because she never flinched. Not from men who looked. Not from men who stared. Not from anyone. "Look at what you did. This is silk. You cannot wash silk. And the fact that you stopped? That is not character. That is liability management. You saw a person standing here and you thought, plate number. Don't stand in front of me with an umbrella and call it an apology." Something moved across his face. Fast, unreadable. His jaw tightened slightly. At his wrist, where his sleeve had shifted in the movement of holding the umbrella, she caught the edge of another tattoo. A different design. Older ink. The kind that told a story the suit was trying to cover. "I stopped because it was the right thing to do," he said. "The right thing was to see the puddle before you drove through it. I have a card. Let me at least—" "I don't want your card." She was already turning, her full silhouette unbothered and absolutely unrushed against the gray of the rain. "I want you to sit in your very nice car and think about what you've done." She walked. One heel. Rain. Ruined silk. Didn't look back once. She didn't know his name yet. She was about to. If you already know where this is going and your stomach just dropped, subscribe right now. Because what happens in this story is going to break you open. The Park and Shin Development Group occupied floors 18 through 24 of a glass tower on South Wacker Drive, 62 developments, 12 cities, 4.2 billion in assets. And that was the public face, the one that appeared in architecture journals and municipal filings, and the glossy brochure Zuri had memorized before her first interview. What she did not know, what nobody in her world knew, was that Park and Shin was also the legitimate arm of something considerably older and considerably less visible. The Shin organization had moved money through construction for 2 generations. By the time Yoon Jun took the company from his father at 31, he had already spent 5 years trying to make the legitimate half large enough to swallow the other half entirely, to build something clean out of something that had never been. He was not finished yet, but he was closer than he had ever been. Zuri knew none of this. When she was standing in the lobby restroom blotting her blazer with paper towels and making decisions, 6 minutes. She blotted the blazer down as far as it would go, snapped the broken heel clean off so both shoes were flat, and smoothed her ruined blowout into a low puff at her nape, which looked, if she was honest with herself, more deliberate than the blowout had anyway. She stood in front of the mirror, looked at herself, full and present and deeply unimpressed with the morning, and walked out with her chin at exactly the correct angle, because she had not spent 8 months on this for a puddle to be the end of her. Ms. Park, Korean, 50s, the polished quiet of someone who had survived considerably more than one damp new hire, met her at the elevator and said nothing about her state, on which Zuri appreciated in the deepest possible way. She walked her down a corridor of clean lines and expensive silence, knocked twice at a set of double doors, and opened them. "Miss Addo is here." Zuri stepped through the door. He was standing at the window with his back to her. Black suit, broad shoulders, the kind of stillness that didn't come from patience. It came from practice, from years of learning how to stand in a room and make the room adjust around you, instead of the other way. He turned. The man from the puddle looked at Zuri Addo. Zuri Addo looked at the man from the puddle. For exactly 2 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Zuri crossed the room, all of her, unhurried and unapologetic, sat in the chair across from his desk, placed her bag on the floor, and looked at him with perfect composure. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to acknowledge what happened this morning." The air in the room shifted. His expression did not change, not 1 degree. "My schedule is tight, Miss Addo. It'll take 30 seconds. She held his gaze. "I was on Michigan Avenue this morning. You drove through a puddle. I ended up wearing most of it. I want you to know that I'm a professional, and what happened on that street will not affect my work here. But I also want you to know that it happened, because I don't believe in pretending things didn't occur simply because they're inconvenient." Silence. "I stopped the car," he said. "You did." "I offered my card." "You did that too." "Then I'm not sure what more you're expecting me to say." The voice of a man who had not often been required to explain himself, in any room, for any reason. "Nothing," she said. "I said what I needed to say. Now we can move on." "My driver didn't see the puddle," he said finally. The words came out stiffly, the particular stiffness of someone who had decided to explain himself and found it uncomfortable. "I know he didn't," she said. "That's the part that bothers me. You both didn't see it because you weren't looking. That's different from an accident. An accident is when you look and something goes wrong anyway." The muscle in his jaw moved once. Then he sat, opened the file, and his voice carried the clipped precision of someone who had decided to be extremely professional at something. "Your portfolio, the Hartwell rebrand, 22% brand equity in 14 months. 26. And the audited numbers came in after the case study published." Something shifted in his expression. Fractional, involuntary. The slight recalibration of a man who had expected something and found something more. 6 weeks to the City Hall pitch. Largest municipal contract in the company's history. You'll lead brand narrative. Understood. He stood. She stood. He came around the desk, and for a brief, charged moment they were close. Close enough that she saw the full line of ink at his collar disappearing beneath his shirt, and the pale ridge of a scar along his left jaw that a very skilled barber had clearly learned to work around. She said nothing about either. He said nothing about the waterline still faintly visible on his left sleeve. He held the door open. She walked through. And whatever had just happened in that room followed both of them out into the corridor like a third person, present, unnamed, not going anywhere. They did not get along. This became apparent by the end of day 1 and crystallized into established fact by day 3, when they argued for 35 minutes about a single paragraph in the City Hall draft and did not reach an agreement. "This language is too soft," he said, standing over the conference table with his arms folded and with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled. The tattoos were visible now, climbing from wrist to forearm in dark, deliberate patterns that had clearly not been chosen for decoration. "City Hall wants impact data, not feeling. City Hall is made of people," Zuri said, not looking up from her laptop. Her bold, dark hands moved across the keys with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once second-guessed her right to take up space in a room. People respond to language that moves them before it informs them. Emotion makes people slow down. That's not weakness in a pitch. That's the opening. That's a theory. And when they skim your numbers because you haven't given them a reason to care yet, what's that? He was quiet for exactly 1 second. Rewrite it. Data embedded in the narrative instead of after it. Then we'll see. That's what I was going to do anyway. Then why are we arguing? You started it. He picked up his papers and left the room. She could hear, in the precise and controlled way his footsteps crossed the floor, that he was annoyed. Good. So was she. And the thing about Hyun-Jun Shin, the thing Zuri cataloged inside the first week and refused to be charmed by, was that he was genuinely, frustratingly, inconveniently good at everything he did. Both the things the world could see and the things it couldn't. He moved through his legitimate company with the same precision he had once moved through rooms that required a different kind of authority entirely. Reading people fast, deciding faster, never showing the working. When he was right, he was so right it made her teeth ache. What drove her productively insane was his instinct to control the shape of things before anyone else could touch them. Top down, closed door, decisions made and handed down with the expectation that the form was already fixed, and her job was to put language around it, not question it. She questioned it constantly. He had hired her for exactly that and still managed to resist it, which was the most professionally offensive contradiction she had encountered in 8 years of work. The second late-night argument happened on a Wednesday, just the two of them in the conference room because everyone else had long gone home. The floor was empty, and the city pressed against the glass 40 stories below, and they argued about the opening of the pitch until 11 p.m., and at the end of 2 hours of parallel silence, throwing sentences across the table at each other like coordinates, she slid the revised section to him, and he read it and said quietly, "This is it." 2 words. She had learned fast that 2 words from him was the equivalent of a standing ovation from anyone else. And she walked to the elevator trying not to think about the fact that she hadn't wanted to leave, that the 2 hours had passed like 20 minutes, that working beside him felt, in some irritating and unmapped way, like being in exactly the right room. She thought about it the entire way home and got off at the wrong stop. Bree Okafor had appointed herself Zuri's guide to the 23rd floor on day 1 and had not yet applied for the position to be made official. Small, precise, Evanston raised with the observational accuracy of someone who should have been a forensic investigator and the restraint of someone who absolutely should not have been. She ate lunch at Zuri's desk 4 days a week and treated it like a standing appointment that had been in the calendar for years. "How's it going with him?" she asked. Wednesday of week 2, he fork aimed at the general direction of Hyunjun's office down the hall. "Financially well. Personally, we argue about everything." "That's new," Bree said, and she meant it as an observation, not a compliment. "He doesn't argue with people. He decides things and people adjust. Every person on this floor, in any meeting I have ever sat in, adjusts. You push back and he doesn't shut it down. That is different." Zuri kept eating. "It's called professional discourse." Said Bree, in the tone of someone who had a different word for it and was choosing not to deploy it yet. Then, Thursday of week 3, without preamble, without even putting her fork down, "He almost didn't post your job." Zuri looked up. The board wanted Paul. Internal hire. 4 years in. A safe choice. The choice you make when you want a result that doesn't surprise you. Hyunjun went to them and said no. He wanted an outside hire. Someone who would tell the company the truth about itself, not what it wanted to hear. His exact words, from someone who was in that room. He read every portfolio himself. Called your old manager personally, not through HR himself. Twice. Zuri set her fork down. "I'm telling you this," Bree said carefully, "because you walk in here every morning like you're still proving you deserve to be here. You're not. You were chosen by someone who does not make choices lightly." She paused, and something shifted in her expression. A careful, deliberate quality. "In any area of his life." Bree. What does that mean? "In any area of his life." Bree set down her fork with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this question. "It means that this company is not the only thing Hyunjun Shin runs, and the people who work close to him, the ones he actually trusts, he chose every single one of them the same way he chose you, personally, carefully, with full information about who they were walking toward." She picked up her fork again. "Just thought you should have the full picture." Paul Choi appeared in her doorway at the end of week 2 and leaned against the frame with the ease of someone who had been told he was likable often enough that it had become structural, load-bearing, necessary, something he could not afford to put down. He was handsome in a careful, maintained way. Korean, early 40s. A jaw that belonged in a boardroom and eyes that belonged somewhere with less lighting. 4 years at Park and Shin, the internal candidate who hadn't gotten the job, and who wore that fact, if you looked closely enough, like a stone in his shoe. What Zuri did not know yet, Paul Choi had not always been a development executive. He had come up in the Shin organization 12 years ago, on the side of it that did not appear in any filing, any annual report, any profile in any trade magazine. He and Hyunjun had shared the same table, the same territory, the same understanding of what it cost to do business in rooms that had no windows, until the night Paul made a calculation that turned out to be wrong, deeply, permanently, lethally wrong for 3 of their people. Hyunjun had not retaliated. He had done something colder. When he had closed the door, moved Paul into the legitimate company, given him a salary and a title and a corner office, and a very clear message that this was as far as he went. No further. Ever. Paul had spent 4 years smiling about it. That smile was one of the most dangerous things on the 23rd floor, and everyone who had been there long enough knew it. He took Zuri to lunch and was excellent company for exactly 20 minutes. "Big swing for a first assignment," he said, stirring his soup with the ease of a man who had never in his life been unsure of his welcome. "The City Hall pitch. It's why they hired me." "True." A pause that lasted one beat too long to be comfortable. "There's a lot of history in that project. Institutional history, the kind that doesn't show up in a brief." She put her spoon down. "Are you offering to help me or telling me to watch my step?" He smiled, practiced and warm, and she didn't trust a single layer of it. Can it be both? Usually not. The performance layer thinned, just slightly, like paint in rain. "He's going to push you hard," Paul said. "When he decides someone is worth the investment, he doesn't ease up, and he's already decided." His eyes moved over her, slowly, deliberately, with the specific kind of attention that wanted to be noticed. "Dinner sometime? Nothing work-related. You're new to the city and Chicago winters are brutal. I know every good restaurant within 5 miles. She held his gaze, even, unbothered. "I'll let you know." Not yes. Paul heard it as maybe. Both of them knew only one of those was true. And she walked back to the office and filed the lunch the way she filed everything, systematically, without judgment, with her full attention. The angle of the invitation, the timing of it, the thing behind his eyes that was older than any corporate title and considerably less polite. She found out what it was 11 days later. The City Hall preliminary brief appeared in the Deputy Commissioner's inbox on a Tuesday. Not the current version, an older draft, softer in every place Zuri had worked to sharpen, vague in every place she had been precise. It made Park and Shin look like every other developer who had ever walked into that room with beautiful surfaces and hollow commitments, and it landed 2 days before a follow-up meeting she had spent a week preparing. And Zuri pulled the version history log she kept on every document, because she always kept a version history log, because she had learned years ago that the document trail was the only thing that didn't lie. Tuesday evening, the night she had stayed late in the conference room with her files open on the shared display screen, someone had accessed the shared drive at 9:47 p.m. Paul. She did not confront him. She rebuilt the brief, tighter than before, sharper in every place the leak had softened, locked the shared access permissions, and went directly to Hyun-Jun's office. "We have a problem," she said from the doorway. He looked up, read her face in under a second. She had noticed he did this, the fast, complete read, the way he processed people before they finished their sentence. "Close the door," she told him, calmly. Our version log open on her phone, held out across his desk. He listened without interrupting, which she had learned was the most dangerous version of his attention, the stillness that meant he was not just hearing, but deciding. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough to feel like a room of its own. "What do you need from me?" he said. Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Paul has been here 4 years." Not, "Let me look into it." Just, "What do you need?" "Nothing," she said. "I've already handled the document. I just thought you should know who's in the room with us." He nodded once. His expression had gone somewhere flat and very precise, a register she had not yet seen in a conference room, a meeting, a pitch review. And it was the face of a man who had just filed a piece of information in a different part of his mind than the one that dealt with quarterly projections. "Thank you for telling me directly," he said. "Stay away from him." The words were quiet, even, but there was a weight behind them that was not in any way a professional recommendation. "Hyun-Jun, it's a request," he said, careful, "not a command. You don't work for me in that way, but Paul Choi is not what his title says he is, and I need you to understand that." She looked at him steadily across the desk, Her gaze the way it always was, direct and undeflectable and entirely her own. "I already knew that," she said. Something moved in his face. Not quite a surprise. The particular recalibration of a man who keeps expecting a ceiling and keeps not finding one. She left. Behind her. When she heard him pick up his phone and begin speaking in Korean, low, brief, utterly different in register from any voice he used in this building during business hours. 3 days before the City Hall pitch, she found it by accident. Wrong folder. One click too deep into a directory she had no reason to be in. Archive. Founder's documents. Do not delete. She should have closed it. She almost closed it. But the top file was labeled NWS Project, Original Vision, HJS 2019. And she opened it the way she opened everything, fully, with her complete attention, intending to understand. 62 pages. Written by Yoon Jun Shin at 29, 2 years before he formally took the company from his father. The language was nothing like the voice she had spent 3.5 weeks working alongside. That voice was controlled, precise, stripped of everything unnecessary. This voice was raw, urgent. He wrote about the Near West Side not as a development target or an opportunity or a line item in a portfolio. He wrote about it as a community that had been quietly, legally dismantled for 40 years while the city told itself a story about progress and renewal. He named specific blocks. He named families. He wrote like a person with a personal reason, not a professional one. If we build here, we build with the people who are already here, or we don't build at all. My father built this company on beautiful surfaces. I want to build something we aren't ashamed of in 20 years. At the back of the document, a photograph. No heading, no label. A block on the Near West Side. A woman standing in front of a 2-flat, maybe 60 years old, arms folded, chin up. An absolute, unmoving stillness that Zuri recognized somewhere in her chest before she could name where. Not defeat, not resignation. Position. The stillness of someone who had decided where she stood and was not available to be moved from it by anyone. Caption. Mrs. Eunice Shin, 1998. This is why. Zuri sat back in her chair. The photograph on his credenza turned face down. The window at 10 p.m. with the weight of something on him that wasn't about a pitch deck. She sat with the document for a long time. Then she opened the pitch deck, deleted every word of the narrative section she had spent weeks building, and started over from nothing. She worked through the night. He found her at 10 o'clock that night. Conference room, materials across every inch of the table. Heels abandoned under her chair. Natural hair loose around her face. Thick and full, the way she wore it when she forgot anyone else was in the building, when she stopped performing and just worked. 3 empty coffee cups in a precise line. The city was dark and glittering 40 stories below. He stood in the doorway and took in the room. Then he crossed it and sat in the chair across from her without being invited, picked up the narrative section without asking, and began to read. She let him. Because she was tired and because some part of her wanted to see his face. He read. At the bottom of page 3, his right hand paused. Half a second, the tell she had cataloged in week 1 and never mentioned. And something moved through his expression that he did not catch in time to control. It moved across his face like the weather. And you rebuilt the entire narrative. The first version was good. This one is true. Where did this come from? She met his eyes. Her gaze was direct and unhurried, and completely her own. I found the archive folder, the 2019 document. I know I shouldn't have opened it. I opened it anyway. I read all of it. She held his gaze. Your grandmother lived on that block. He went very still. I intend to use it to tell the truth about why this project matters, she said. Not your family's private history, the principle underneath it. That this company has spent years building surfaces, and this is the one project that builds something it actually owes. She paused. If you want me to revert to the original narrative, I will, but I think you would be leaving something real on the table, something that cannot be rebuilt once it's been left. The room was very quiet. Leave the narrative as written. The words came out quietly, like they arrived from somewhere that required effort to reach. It's the right call. She nodded once, gathered the pages into a neat stack, and stood, sliding her feet back into her flat shoes. Ms. Addo. She stopped, didn't turn all the way. I found the photograph, she said to the air in front of her, because I found the document. I went looking because I could not figure out why you were building this company into something different from what it started as. When I found it, I understood. The pitch will honor what she stood for, not your family history, the principle. That's all I wanted you to know. The silence behind her stretched. She was in the elevator when her phone buzzed, and an unfamiliar number. Delivery arriving at your address in 30 minutes. Soup dumplings, Sir Mac Road. She had mentioned that restaurant once, to Bree, weeks ago, in passing, in a conversation Yoon Jun Shin had not been present for. She rode down in silence and decided firmly that she was not going to think about what that meant. She thought about it the entire way home. The night before the pitch, she stayed late again. Not because the work required it. The narrative was done, the deck was final. She had printed 3 copies and placed them in the boardroom already. She stayed because she could not make herself leave, because the 23rd floor at 10 p.m. felt in some way she had not yet found language for, like the place she was supposed to be. She was at the window in the small kitchen at the end of the hall, coffee in hand, looking at the city, all that cold, luminous Chicago sprawl, when she heard him come in behind her. You should go home, he said. You're still here, she said without turning. He came to stand beside her at the window, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she was aware with absolute precision of exactly how much space existed between them. I wanted to check the deck one more time, he said. You've checked it 4 times. 5 is thorough. She turned to look at him then, sideways, the way you look at something you're trying to understand without being caught understanding it. He was still in his suit, jacket on, the tattoo at his collar the only thing that broke the controlled perfection of his appearance. And he was looking at the city with the expression she had cataloged 3 or 4 times now, the one that wasn't performance or management, the one that was just him, in a room, with the weight of something he was carrying. Why the near West Side? She asked. You could have picked any project to make the pivot. Why that one? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because it's the one my father specifically told me not to touch. Too complicated. Not enough return. The kind of project that costs more than it makes in the first 5 years. He paused. He built this company by knowing which things to leave alone. I built mine by deciding that his list was wrong. She looked at him. He turned to look back, and in the particular silence that followed, the city below, the empty floor behind them, the narrow space between 2 people who had been circling something for weeks, she felt it shift. The air between them changed quality, became specific. He looked at her the way he had been trying not to look at her since the morning on Michigan Avenue, like she was something he had already decided about and was attempting to undecide and finding it harder than expected. She did not look away. She never looked away. His head tilted, barely, a millimeter. The almost movement of a man choosing, right at the edge of the choice. Her phone buzzed. Adiz, her sister, calling from Accra at what was an unreasonable hour for everyone involved. The spell broke cleanly, the way glass breaks, completely, with no going back to the shape it had been. Zuri looked at her phone, then at him. "I have to take this," she said. "Of course." He straightened. The composure reassembled itself so smoothly that someone who had not been watching very carefully might have believed nothing had happened. Zuri had been watching very carefully. She went into the corridor to take the call, pressed her back against the wall, and stood there for a moment before answering. One hand flat against the cool plaster, steadying herself from something she was not yet ready to name. She slept badly that night. She was not going to think about why. 12 people in the City Hall conference room, 2 aldermen, a deputy commissioner, a community development director named Aldridge, with the careful energy of someone who had been promised things before and developed a very precise instrument for detecting the difference. And a woman in the back row who never introduced herself and took notes on everything. Yoon Jun presented the financials, exact, fluent, the room giving him the specific deference that certain kinds of men generate without appearing to try for it. Then Zuri stood up, all of her, full and present and taking up exactly the space she was owed and had always been owed and had never once asked permission for. She did not go to the deck first. She looked at Commissioner Aldridge and said, "Before I show you a single slide, I want to acknowledge something. This community has been promised beautiful buildings before. Most of those promises prioritize the building over the people already living there. If we can't be honest about that history before we say one word about this project, we have no business being in this room." The room changed, and she felt 12 people sit up slightly. The particular shift of people who had been settling in for something familiar and found something else. She told the real story. A company built on beautiful surfaces by a man who measured everything in returns. Taken over by his son, who had a different accounting entirely. A neighborhood that had been quietly dismantled for 40 years, while the city told itself a story about progress. A project that was not just a development opportunity. It was a reckoning. A public commitment made binding by contract. "We're not asking you to trust our vision. We're asking you to hold us to a standard we are publicly committing to right now, in this room, in front of these witnesses, and to sign a contract that makes that commitment enforceable. We know it only means something if we deliver, or so we're asking you to let us." She did not look at Hyun Jun while she said any of it. When she sat down, Aldridge's expression had been changing for 4 minutes and hadn't stopped. The woman in the back had put her pen down entirely. "Mr. Shin," one alderman said, "are you comfortable with this level of disclosure?" The room turned. Zuri turned with it. He was looking at her, not at the alderman, at her, and on his face was something she had not seen before, something that had arrived before he could intercept it, something warm and specific and entirely unmanaged. "Completely," he said. The contract cleared 43 hours later. When the notification came through at 6 a.m., Zuri sat up in bed and read it 3 times. Then she called a Daisy, who listened without interrupting, which was unusual for a Daisy. "He sent you dumplings," a Daisy said. "That is not the point of the story. Sis, he sent you dumplings from a restaurant you mentioned once to someone else when he wasn't in the room. That is the entire point of the story." Zuri hung up. This was not a productive conversation. 2 days after the contract cleared, Paul found Zuri in the atrium, not her office, the open atrium on the 21st floor where the whole building could see. He came to stand beside her at the coffee station with the easy, territorial confidence of a man who had made a decision about something and wanted it witnessed. "Congratulations," he said. "You pulled it off." He said it with warmth, and she did not trust the warmth. "I owe you a celebratory dinner. I'm not taking no for an answer this time. He put his hand on her arm. It was a light touch, decalculated in its lightness, deniable, friendly, just enough pressure to be felt. Zuri looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. "Paul," she said pleasantly, "take your hand off my arm." He did, smiled. "Just being friendly." "I know exactly what you're being," she said with the same pleasantness, the same absolute steadiness. "And the answer is still what it was last time." She picked up her coffee and walked back toward the elevator. What she did not see, Hyun-jun had come out of the stairwell at the far end of the atrium during the exchange. He had seen all of it. The hand, her face, the way she removed herself with complete and devastating calm. He stood at the far end of the atrium for a moment after she was gone, and the expression on his face was not the controlled, precise register of a CEO managing a situation. And it was something older and considerably less managed. Tae-yang materialized at his shoulder, the way Tae-yang always materialized, present without having arrived. "Sir." "I know," Hyun-jun said, quiet. His eyes were still on the spot where Zuri had been standing. "Should I?" "Not yet. Watch him." Tae-young nodded once and was gone. Hyun-jun stood in the atrium for a moment longer. Then he went back to his office and closed the door and did not call Paul Choi that afternoon, which required more restraint than most people on the 23rd floor would have believed he possessed. She was followed on a Thursday. Not obviously. Not the way it happened in films. A silver sedan appeared in her peripheral vision twice on her walk to the train, once at the corner of Wacker, once near the entrance to the platform. She noticed because she noticed everything, and because the second time the driver did not look away fast enough, and the kind of person who looks away fast enough is not the kind of person who is simply parked. She went home, sat at her kitchen table, thought carefully about what she knew and what she didn't. She told Hyun-jun the next morning. Door closed, voice even, the version history calm she brought to every difficult thing. He did not ask if she was sure. He said when and which corner, and then stepped to the window and made a call in Korean, low and brief and in a register she had never heard from him in a professional context. When he turned back, his face had rearranged itself into something she recognized from the document, not from the boardroom. From the 62 pages written at 29 years old, by a man who understood very specifically what it cost to build something in a world that was trying to keep the shape it already had. "I need to explain something to you," he said. "I think I already know the broad outline," she said. He looked at her. "The tattoos," she said. "The way Tae-yang stands outside a room before you enter it. The way Paul spoke about you at lunch. Not like a former colleague, like someone who is afraid of you and will not say so. The calls you make in Korean after I bring you problems." She held his gaze, all of her present, steady and entirely without fear. "I'm not naive, and I'm not fragile. Tell me what I need to know." He sat down. Unusual, he thought better standing, and told her the shape of it, the organization his father built, and the 12 years he had spent pulling the legitimate half large enough to swallow everything else. The enemies that process had made, men who saw a company going clean as a betrayal of a permanent arrangement. Paul made contact with one of those men 6 weeks ago. "I've known. I've been managing it." He looked at her directly. "I did not anticipate they would move toward you." "Why me?" she said, though she already half knew. The pause before he answered was the most honest thing she had ever seen on his face, because they are very good at identifying what matters to a person. The room was very quiet. "You have 3 options," he said. "You can leave the company. I'll write you a reference that opens any door you choose, and you will never be touched. You can stay and accept a security arrangement, Tae Yang's team, nothing visible. Or you can let me resolve it completely. 72 hours. You won't know the details. Option 2, she said, Tae Young's team, and I want to know when it's resolved. Not the details, just the word. He nodded. And Hyun Jun. She stood. The next time something involving me is already in motion, I find out the same time you do, not managed, not after, the same time. Agreed. Zuri. Her name. Not Ms. Addo. Her name, in his voice, for the first time. She stopped at the door. I'm sorry this reached you, he said. It shouldn't have. She turned to look at him, fully, with everything. I know, she said. I'm not angry at you for what your world is. I'm only going to be angry if you try to protect me from information I'm owed. There's a difference. She held his gaze one beat longer. Don't make that mistake. She left. And in the corridor, she straightened her jacket, lifted her chin, and went back to work. She was shaking, very slightly, in a place she would not let anyone see. Not from fear, from the weight of understanding, finally and completely, what she had walked into, and the absolute certainty that she was not walking out. Paul appeared in her doorway with his warmth dialed all the way down, the thing underneath it visible now, sharper, older, carrying the particular grievance of a man who has been made to accept less than he wanted for a very long time. Yoon Capital, he said, sitting without being invited. Silent investors. Right of first refusal on any municipal contract over $100 million. The Near West Side deal is 142. They've exercised the right. Board meeting is Friday. Everything you promised City Hall, the integration programs, the timeline, the neighborhood commitments, restructured, faster build, standard package, nothing binding. Cold moved through her. She kept her face still. Hyun Jun needs 6 of 9 board votes to block it. He has 4. Paul held her gaze, and underneath the presentation was something she recognized now as its true shape. A man trying to use her as an instrument against the person he was afraid of. I could be vote 5, have dinner with me. 1 dinner. She looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. You're asking me, she said, to trade a dinner for a board vote that protects a community of real people who were promised something real. I'm asking you to dinner, he said smoothly. The board vote is just what happens to be on my calendar Friday. Paul. Her voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had never once felt the need to rush a no. If I ever have dinner with you, it will be because I want to, not because you held a neighborhood hostage to get a yes. What you said in this room will not leave it. My answer will not change. She stood. I'm going to go find Park Sang-il's contact file. The angles dropped from his face. For just a moment she saw it cleanly. A man who had miscalculated the wrong woman. He left. She gave herself exactly 15 seconds. Then she went to find Hyun Jun. He was at his desk at 7 p.m., still in the way of a man thinking rather than reading. She stood in his doorway. Friday's board meeting. She stepped in. If Yoon Capital restructures this project, every promise I made to those 12 people disappears. I made those promises in that room. Let me build a financial case for Park Sang-il tonight. Community investment as risk management, regulatory protection, long-term asset value. Give me tonight and I'll give you a path. This isn't your fight, he said. I made it mine. She came to his desk, all of her solid and certain and not going anywhere. Are you going to stop me? Something in him released, small, real, the particular release of a man who has been holding something at arm's length for a long time and has just decided to put it down. Park Sang-il responds to financial clarity, he said, picking up a pen. Community investment isn't charity. It's risk management, regulatory protection, long-term asset value. He looked at her. If you can make that case tonight, I have a path. They worked until 1 a.m, side by side at the conference table. Her sharpening language, him tightening data, his handwriting small and exact, hers extravagant, margin-eating, unapologetic, the full, bold sweep of her across every page. At some point, the city below went from active to quiet, and neither of them remarked on it. At 11:30, she caught him reading one of her notes with the half-second pause she knew meant he had been surprised by something. "Stop," she said without looking up. "I haven't said anything." "You're doing the face. Your right hand stops. Half a second. I've been watching it for 4 weeks." He looked at her with something very direct. "You've been watching me." "I watch everything. It's how I do my job." "Is that what this is?" he said. Not quite a question, and the room went very quiet. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said the thing that had been building for 4 weeks, because neither of them was ready to say it in a conference room at midnight over a board document, and they both knew it, and that knowing was its own kind of answer. "Board document," she said. "Back to work." He picked up his pen without argument, but at 12:45, when they were packing up and she reached across the table for her jacket and her sleeve caught the corner of his notepad and sent it to the floor, they both reached for it at the same moment and their hands met over the page, her full dark hand over his, warm and completely still. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then he picked up the notepad and handed it to her, and she took it. And they finished packing up in a silence that had changed its shape entirely. Park Sang-il's reply arrived at 6:04 a.m. Friday. Attendance confirmed. Bree had it on Zuri's desk by 7:45. He has never confirmed attendance in advance in 6 years on this board. He's confirming because he's already decided, and he wants Hyun-jun to know before he walks in. She looked at Zuri with open significance. That document worked. At 4:19, Tai Yang appeared in Zuri's doorway, said nothing, looked at her, gave one slow, deliberate nod, and then, so quietly she almost missed it. The other matter is resolved. 7 votes, and the world she'd been walking around the edge of since Thursday secured. She let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she'd been holding since Thursday evening. At 4:47, Hyun-jun appeared, and standing in her doorway the way she had stood in his, choosing to be there, making the choice visible. 7 votes, and Tae Yang gave you the other message. He did. She looked at him. Thank you. Park Sang-il said it was the most compelling board document he had seen in 6 years. He asked who built it. His voice was even, but underneath it was the warmth he kept at a controlled volume, like a frequency he had decided to stop suppressing. I told him the truth, that it was built by the person who understands what this company is supposed to be. I made a reservation, he said. That surprised her. She let him see it. For what? Dinner. Oriole. He held her gaze steadily. I made it 2 weeks ago, before I knew if the board meeting would happen, in case you would come. She went very still. 2 weeks ago. In case, he said again, like the word was doing real work. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything, every argument, every draft rewritten, every time she pushed and he pushed back, and the thing between them sharpened instead of broke. She thought, I have been falling, and I have been telling myself I was standing. My rule, she said. No feelings for men who control my paycheck. A reasonable rule. Very reasonable. Are you following it? She looked at him, straight at him, nothing filtered, every inch of her present and certain and completely her own. I've been trying, she said. I've not been successful. Something opened in his face. Not performance, not management. Relief, warm, genuine. On the expression of a man who has been holding a door closed for a long time and has just been told it's all right to let go. Oriel, he said. 40-page wine list. Of course it is. She picked up her bag. If you splash me on the way, I'll stay on the sidewalk. They walked to the elevator. In the moment before the doors opened, she said, You turned the photograph face up. He looked at her, genuinely, actually caught, for the first time since Michigan Avenue. How do you... I watch everything, she said. Always. The day after the pitch, he said quietly. It felt like she'd earned it. The elevator opened. Their reflections appeared side by side in the mirrored doors, closer than colleagues, exactly as close as something that had spent 4 weeks pretending to be something else. Oriel had a 40-page wine list, and they did not read past page 3. They stayed until the restaurant was almost empty, which was not something either of them had planned, and which neither of them moved to end. They talked the way two people talk when they have been using professional language as a container for something else entirely, and have finally, with relief, put the container down. She told him about growing up in Accra, about her mother's insistence that a woman who took up room was a woman worth knowing. He told her about his grandmother's 2 flat, the kitchen that always smelled like something cooking, the way she spoke about the neighborhood with the possessive certainty of someone who had never for 1 second considered that it might not always be hers. She would have argued with you, he said. So about everything. Good, Zuri said. I would have won. Something moved across his face that she had not seen at the office, open and unguarded, the expression of a man who had forgotten, for a few hours, to be careful. They walked out into a Chicago night that had gone cold and clear, the city bright and sharp-edged around them. He fell into step beside her, not in front, not behind, exactly beside, and they walked 2 blocks without a particular destination before she stopped and turned to face him. Last night in the conference room, she said. Yeah, he said. The kitchen, before the pitch. I know that, he said. She looked at him, her face offering him nothing except the complete and honest truth of what she was. So stop managing it, she said. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he stepped forward. Or when she did not step back, and what happened next belonged entirely to the two of them. She did not go home that night. In the morning, she woke in his apartment, all glass and clean lines, and on the nightstand, a framed photograph she recognized. Mrs. Eunice Shin, arms folded, chin up, standing in front of the 2 flat on the near west side. Face up now, watching. Zuri lay there for a moment looking at that photograph. Then she got up, found his kitchen, found her coffee blend already in the cabinet, already there, which meant it had been there before last night, and made 2 cups. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at her standing at his counter in the morning light, full and radiant and completely at home in herself and in this room. You found the coffee, he said. You already had my coffee, she said. He said nothing. But the expression on his face said everything that 4 weeks of conference rooms and late nights and managed silences had been refusing to say. She handed him his cup. He took it. And that was that. 6 months later, the first time Zuri told the story at a dinner party, she made it very funny. She did a full reenactment of the heels snapping. The sound, the look down, the look up, the breath. She described the puddle with meteorological precision. She told the part where she pointed a latte cup at the man who runs a criminal organization on 2 continents and informed him that stopping the car is liability management, and the table was losing it before she even reached the reveal. And then, she said, I walk into his building, into his office, and he turns around from the window. Same suit, still damp. And we just, she paused, look at each other. I recovered first, Yeonjun said beside her. You barely recovered. First is first. Bree from the end of the table, and then she sits down and tells him, to his face on her first day in his office, that stopping the car doesn't make him a good person. She looked around the table. The man has people, and she told him to sit and think about what he'd done. I was making a point, Zuri said. Several points, Hyunjun said, clearly, at some length. You were defensive. I stopped the car. That was the minimum. The table laughed. Tai Young at the far end was on his 4th dumpling with the focused tranquility of a man who was absolutely listening and would not be admitting to it under any circumstances. What were you thinking? She asked. I quiet enough now that it was just between them. That first morning, when I was yelling at you on the street. I was thinking, he said, that you were the first person in a very long time who was more concerned with whether I understood something than with what it cost you personally to say it. He looked at her steadily, the way he had learned to let himself look at her. That's not a common thing, in any room I have ever been in. I was furious, she said. You were principled, he said. The two can coexist, in people worth paying attention to. The table went soft. Zuri reached over and put her hand over his on the table. Her full, beautiful, dark hand, the one that had written drafts until 1 a.m., and built board documents and held version logs and reached for every single thing it wanted without ever once asking if it was allowed. And he turned his palm up without hesitation. The way you reach for something you already know is there. Across the room, her coat hung by the door and clipped inside the pocket. Small, folded, soft, opened too many times, was his business card. The one she had refused on the street 6 months ago. She had gone back for it. 3 minutes after walking away, she had picked it up off the wet sidewalk, dried it on her ruined blazer, and kept it. She had never told him. She didn't need to. Outside, Chicago did what it always did. Luminous, indifferent, entirely unbothered by what got decided on its streets and in its offices and at its dinner tables and in the quiet of its mornings. Zuri had walked into its rain 6 months ago, furious and soaked and one-heeled. She had aimed everything she had at the wrong man, who turned out to be exactly the right one. Subscribe now if this story held you from the first heel snap to the last word. Like this video and drop a comment below. I read every single one. Thank you very much for staying till the end. I will see you soon, besties.